Hi, Rachel. Welcome to the Neurodiversity podcast. It's a pleasure to have you. I met Rachel at the Autism Europe conference last year. And Rachel does a lot of research. And especially around the topic of, autism identity. She's done a lot of on this topic, and we'll get to that in a moment. But first, I'm going to ask Rachel a few questions about herself. Hi, Rachel.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So let's get to your biography first a little bit. When did you first hear about the term autism?
I feel like it was kind of relatively heard about and talked about throughout my life. I wasn't necessarily the most familiar with what autism was growing up, but I heard of it. I feel like I got to know a bit more, I think, throughout university, like studying psychology.
Okay, so you were first introduced to the term before you knew you were one of them?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you were studying psychology at university, and autism was part of what you learned about?
Not a ton. I think it's sort of mentioned here and there.
Yeah, I know it's not very prominent usually, but it does come up, right?
Yeah, but that's kind of the context where I was hearing about it the most. Yeah.
And was that like did you feel some sort of attraction to the subject, or did it ring a bell? Was there anything did it start right away when you started interacting with the subject, or when did you find out that you were autistic?
I guess, also when I was in university was when they were updating the most recent DSM, where they collapsed.
When they went from 4 to 5?
Yeah, when they went from 4 to 5, where they collapsed the different categories into autism spectrum disorder generally. So I think that was also.
Let me make a short remark for the uninformed listener. So in the DSM-4 autism, there were pretty much 4 major categories. There was early childhood autism, there was Asperger's autism, there was an extra category that wasn't really formulated out, the high functioning, and then there's the unusual representation of autism. Did I miss something?
And one of the categories that got brought into autism was pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified.
Yeah.
Kind of
we're not quite sure. That's the one I meant. That's like the unusual form of autism. Like that's where we put all the ones that don't fit in the others or something. And then in the DSM-5, they collapsed all of these into the autistic spectrum that we are talking about today. And that is still an ongoing discussion. Was that a good idea to collapse it? What exactly is a spectrum? And there's some people who want to synthesize all of this into a theory of neurodiversity, and then there's people who are quite critical of that. Would you say that's proper way of putting the current situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, people who kind of want to synthesize things, people who want to divide it up in different ways, people who don't think autism should be in the DSM at all. A lot of different perspectives as to the current categorization of things.
All right, but let's get back to you before we jump into that thing. I just wanted to explain real quick with the DSM-4.
Yeah, so that discussion was kind of going on in the background in public. So I think, I don't know, I feel like I'm always like reading through the DSM to figure out like which one of these match my experience. So I think there's a little bit of that curiosity. And then there's a little bit of, I think, my interest in kind of like mental health and the perspectives of people who are in kind of like mental health advocacy movements, of the perspectives of people's lived experience. And I think that's kind of where I first started hearing about like neurodiversity movement. So it's kind of like all these things in the background kind of making me think about it more. And then, yeah, I was diagnosed when I was 27. So kind of towards the end of my PhD program, where I was kind of like unsure. And then I was, talking to the psychologist. And then again, I was still unsure. So then later, another psychologist was like, yes, you have autism. So it was kind of like a gradual kind of bringing together of all these different sources of information, I feel like.
There is a classical biography of autistic women, in the sense that a lot of autistic women have that kind of biography, which is they will mask for a long time, and usually somewhere in between their 20s and their 40s, there happens this enormous crash where the masking, the suppression of oneself leads to the kind of pressure that leads to psychological pathologies. That can be all sorts of things. OCD would be one example. And then it's just too much. Then they can't do it anymore. Then it all breaks down, and they have to kind of face the facts, to kind of reinvent themselves. Is that something that was in your biography?
Kind of. I feel like a lot of I feel like kind of throughout my life, I kind of managed by like really focusing on like academic skills and being good at studying, which worked well until I got to grad school, where I was in a counseling psychology program and learning more about working with actual people. And like I could kind of like, I mean, I've always been like very introverted and very like I don't know, just a unique person, but like I think various forms of feedback I think I got during grad school about like my interpersonal presentation, and then the things I was doing to compensate for that was like very stressful and difficult. And then I feel like, and I didn't have the same, and other people like were, it's grad school, you're all learning something new, but like other people weren't having the same like difficulties I was. And then that kind of like helped me like kind of reevaluate and think back on my life. So I feel like that was kind of especially also just like I had to watch myself on video interacting with people so much in like therapy settings, which is like the worst. Everybody hates that, but I was just like, I don't feel like I act like the way that I am in my head. I feel like a lot of people feel like that too, though.
Yeah. This is something I would really like to do at school sometimes. Film the kids interacting and show them things that from the inner perspective you don't notice about yourself. But I think that can be really dangerous as well, because I'm thinking especially with kids that kind of tend into the PDA profile, pathological demand avoidance. I think that could really mess them up. So I think in one ways that could really help but you got to be really careful about it too. And so, did you feel like when you were watching yourself that you noticed more, like that you saw the autism in yourself better, or that you saw the differences to others? Is that kind of what it did?
I don't know. Like, I think it compounded this feeling of self-consciousness that was already very much there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, I think especially when comparing myself with other people, I'm like, I never think of myself as like a fidgety person, but I'm like, I can't sit still on the video. I don't know where I'm looking. I like my facial expressions and like eyes are kind of doing whatever they're doing. Versus other people aren't necessarily doing that. And I think part of it is just I'm not used to like knowing what I look like from a third person perspective. But I think part of it is like, even when I'm like, I was told, like, one of the pieces of feedback I was given is that like my voice was too monotone and I needed to be more expressive, which is a whole other can of worms of like, I feel like maybe they don't tell that kind of thing to men in training, but they told it to me. But then I was like kind of looking up these like acting exercises on YouTube about how to be like more expressive. So I was able to like I just like practice modulating my voice a bunch. So I got that, but then when I'm not quite sure what to do with my face. So I got some of that, but it's just kind of like a weird laboratory of like masking self-education that of like, yeah, traits that I hadn't really thought about before, and then was trying to like cover up, and then later was like, well, why am I bothering with covering all this up?
So I think your voice is just fine. And I don't like over effectuation. And sometimes, like, I mean, especially the US is a place where over effectuate, or to me as a European, it feels over effectuated. That is a thing that we as Europeans notice. So I think you're just fine. And also, to me, it seems like you have an inner library, and that's where your eyes are. Like, you are going through your own library or database while you're speaking, which is perfectly fine. A lot of smart people do that.
It's a cool way to think about it.
Yeah. I like to watch a lot of podcasts with experts that talk on a certain topic. And a lot of people do that. Have you ever come across Jordan Peterson?
I've heard of him. I haven't seen him talk.
The way he talks, it's like he's manifesting something in this space. Like he's constantly going on with his head and his hands. It's like a whole performance, like a whole body performance. But that would just be one example of people who are like that. I think that's perfectly fine. I think you shouldn't bother training on that part, unless it really holds you down in your job. But I think that as a researcher, you're probably surrounded by people who are at least somewhat like that, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think also, I feel like research is often either like just kind of collegial conversations, or you're like giving a presentation, which is easier for me to do because it's like you just know what you're going to say and do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like in research, there's a variety of interpersonal presentations, and I think there's a bit more room for like different ways of interacting.
Yeah. So please feel your quirkiness appreciated in the way it is.
That's the hope. Thanks.
So that whole thing where you got your autism diagnosis, it happened towards the end of your studies?
Yeah, so I got the diagnosis right before COVID. So it was during final couple months of the normal part of my PhD, and then the last year of my PhD is a full-time clinical internship. So that was like working as a therapist full-time for a year. And then the kind of like reconfirmation of the diagnosis is, yeah, maybe a year or two later.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was towards the end of my studies.
Mm-hmm. And you had already mentioned you got along somewhat in school in the role of, I suppose, nerdy girl who's useful because she knows things. Yeah, that's kind of the role that I skated along as well. Mm-hmm. And then it was more difficult in university. Do you have any tips for other people who have plans for going to university? I mean, autistic people. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, like I went through university without knowing I was autistic, which there's pros and cons. I feel like something that would have helped me in university was going to the mental health services at my college. I think I was just like intimidated or thought they like couldn't deal with me. But then I've been on the other side of that, like as a university counselor, and like they see a wide range of things. But yeah, I feel like having, sorry, a fly has come in, having that on the back burner. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think I liked about university was a wider range of people than I encountered before. So it was easier to like, it was harder to get friends in terms of there's more people, but it's easier to get friends in terms of there's more types of people, I feel like, and you can kind of figure out, you could find.
And rituals where you get in contact with people automatically, where you don't have to initiate anything? Like university parties or just having classes together. You regularly meet people by design of the thing that you're doing.
Yeah. So you're able to meet people who like have similar interests, whether it's like subject matter, or like university clubs. And I think also my experience of being a university therapist is like, I feel like there was tons of students who are like, I want friends and I don't have friends and I'm afraid. I'm like, if I put all these people together who wanted friends in a room, they would all be friends. So everybody wants friends.
Yeah, that makes sense as well. And was that a bit of a burnout at the end of your study? Were you that situation where you were going into that for that diagnosis?
I think I was struggling more through grad school, and I think balancing all the different roles of like it wasn't just like doing well in classes, but then it was doing therapy work and also teaching and doing research. And then kind of like feeling very out of place with other people around me. I feel like then my final year of my PhD was the clinical internship, which was also during COVID, which is a unique time to work as a mental health professional. So that was a bit rough.
Did you, at that point, were you in the US or in the UK?
I was in the US, so I had moved to another state because that's where it was. And then it was unsure if when the pandemic would end. So it was unsure if I'd ever go in person, but I never actually did go in person. But yeah, that was still in the US. I came to the UK a few years after graduation. Yeah.
And in the US, what state were you in during COVID?
I started in Arizona and then I moved to Wisconsin for my internship.
So Arizona, Wisconsin, they are both rather low population states, right? Low population density.
Yeah, like I was in the near Phoenix in Arizona, which is the main city, but it's
Phoenix is kind of the biggest city, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a pretty huge city.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's like Phoenix, Tucson, Flagstaff are like kind of the three biggest cities in Arizona. And then there's a lot of Arizona that's very rural or very not many people there.
Well, I'm just trying to imagine what the lockdowns looked like. I mean, I was at the time that COVID happened, I was living in one of the most densely populated areas in Europe. So we had actual lockdowns where pretty much everything but the supermarket and the pharmacy was closed down. So what did that look like?
We had suggested lockdown, American style. So I was, at that point, I was teaching a class and our class was virtual. But I generally just, stayed at home and went on walks. Sometimes they shut down the hiking trails nearby that were run by the National Forest Service.
They shut down the hiking trails.
So they shut down the hiking trails that were the National Forest Service because it was the federal government. But then the trails that were run by local, like the state or the city or whatever, were open, but then there are more people concentrated there.
Okay,
it was a weird time.
Okay, I thought, it sounds just as silly as it was over.
I mostly just went on walks every day around the neighborhood and counted all the cats I saw. And that was my main memory of the first bit of COVID. And then I moved to Wisconsin at the beginning of June. So I was driving across the country, which was interesting to see the different states. But then in Wisconsin, it was in a college town. It was in Madison. So it was like also a similar lifestyle of working from home and then going on walks.
Okay. Yeah, but then I suppose therapy is something, I mean, to some people, it's important to sit in front of an actual human being, but I suppose a large part of it can be done via a Zoom call or something like that, right?
Yeah. I think, different people feel different ways about it. I think it's because having done both, I feel like I'm not as bothered by Zoom only as some other people are. And I've also heard people talk about well, I don't know where to look. And I'm like, well, welcome to my life. I don't know where to look either. And it's kind of nice because then I can have notes up or whatever. But also there's also just the issues of people are living with other people and didn't have a private space, or just people calling in from their car. And I'm like, why are you in your car right now? Luckily I don't think I ever had anybody that was actually driving. Yeah.
And when you do therapy, do you ever feel anxious that you cannot relate enough to them because you're autistic? Or are you more well, I have some distance and that makes me a better at my work?
I think I mean, I think the cool thing about therapy is you get to know a person in relative depth. So I feel like I really enjoyed the process of doing my best to understand what other people are going through. I think I struggle to sometimes communicate my understanding back to them, because that seems, because people kind of like that. But I feel connected with people, and like, it's hard to say that I understand what people are going through, because nobody really fully understands what other people are going through. But I feel like I don't feel limited in that respect.
Okay. Well, thanks for the insights into your life. Now, let's look at you as a researcher and scientist. So I want to start off with a question, and I hope it's not too mean of a question, but do you consider yourself a scientist, an activist, or both? And if both, could you give us percentages?
I think I would have liked to see myself as an activist, but I think in reality, I'm more of a scientist. Like, I mean, I live in a society, and I think social movements and activism influence the types of things that might strike my attention. And I hope my research impacts people. But I've also encountered people who are like, my science is my activism. And I get annoyed because I'm like, you're just writing papers. Like, I feel like there needs to be something more than that. And I feel like I can't claim to be doing as much activism as somebody who claims to be an activist.
So when I wrote down that question, I thought about that myself a little bit, and I was thinking, like, philosophically, if we look at this, I mean, if you do proper science, it's gonna have an impact in the world, most likely. If it's proper science, and if it's about something important, it's gonna have impact. So you're gonna be some sort of activist no matter what you do. But then I feel like a statement like, my science is my activism, I'd also be bothered by that statement, but I think for different reasons. Because I think if you're saying 100% of your science is activism, then I would argue you're probably doing the science part wrong. Because you're supposed to look at the thing and find out what it really is, and not have the results succumb to how you would like the world to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we are all biased when it comes to what we choose to study and how we interpret things. I also think it's important to be open to, like, being wrong, essentially, or being open to looking at things not the way that I would have my first instinct. But yeah, I think, especially when people act like they don't have any type of preconceived notions about anything, it's a bit hard for me to trust. Like, it's hard, like, kind of how to situate how they're interpreting things. But there's also some bits of science that are I feel like easier to distance your personal views a bit more from others.
Yeah, definitely. I think if you're in thermonuclear physics or something, and you're not working on weaponry, and that's probably a very technical field.
Yeah.
Or something. Maybe. Okay. And intersectionality plays a big part in your work. And before we get deeper into your work, I was wondering if you could give us your definition of intersectionality.
Yeah. So I think in general, the original metaphor was an intersection of roads, which is a nice way to think about it. But then I start thinking about like 5 different roads, and that's too many roads. But basically, I view intersectionality as a framework for paying attention to how multiple forms of like power and social inequalities can impact people in different ways, kind of depending on the individual's relationship to it, which is an extremely abstract concept. So I feel like a lot of times, especially in psychology, people are kind of paying attention to like what categories people fall into. But I feel like the only reason why these categories matter is because these categories have like a relationship to some type of like power structure, if that makes sense. So I feel like it's this combination of like individual experience, but also in a relationship to all the different power dynamics going on.
Okay. To me, that sounds like a very postmodern interpretation of intersectionality. There's something I thought about. So in the hard sciences like physics or math, it is ideal when you can break something down to the smallest part. And if you know how the smallest part works, then you can put the small parts in a larger system. And then the theories that you developed about how the small part works, they'll allow you to make some predictions. And then you can look at the larger system and see if those predictions come true. And in that sense, if you look at the small part and understand every particle of the small part, then you can make assumptions about the big part. And I feel like in the softer sciences, like psychology, or just in general, looking at the field of psychology and related fields, human sciences, it feels like if you try to understand just the smallest part, you will definitely miss the big picture. And it's kind of symptomatic of Western medicine that looks like one organ, and oh, there's something wrong with the organ, so we'll cut it out. Oh, no, the patient's not better. As a bit of a cliche interpretation of that. But that it seems like in the humanities, a more wholesome approach is necessary. And I was wondering, can intersectionality also be interpreted in that way, that looking at different intersections is necessary to not miss the big picture? Because when I'm thinking about autism research, for instance, back in the day, there was also this thing, let's look at this in isolation. And when I look at psychology, there's I feel like the older approaches to psychology are very one-on-one. So there's the patient and there's the therapeutic, and they work one-on-one. And as it moves on, we have more systematic approaches. So, for instance, instead of working with just the child, we're going to work with the family unit instead of, and the same for an adult patient. We're not just going to talk to them. We're not just going to look at that. We're going to look at the relationships that they have and so on. So could it also be is that also a thing? Because when I read over some of your papers, it felt like you needed intersectionality as a more appropriate tool to work on the things that you work on.
Yeah, I think actually, so I have all these ideas about intersectionality. Then I feel like the putting it into action in research is easier said than done. I think intersectionality is a useful framework for understanding kind of especially like diversity within a group of like, other than like just autism, you have a lot of people are autistic, but like there's a lot of variability within there.
Mm-hmm.
And intersectionality is a good way of kind of understanding this. But it's hard to do because I think a lot of times, even if you are paying attention to intersectionality, you may be like focusing on specific elements of it and still missing part of the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was your question, but I feel like that's maybe part of the challenge.
Yeah, maybe my question wasn't even a question, but I was rather more chewing out my thoughts and put a question mark at the end. So, but I hope that gives the viewer or listener some insight into what we're talking about when we're talking about intersectionality. So, please tell me, what is critical autism studies to you? What does it mean?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but from my perspective, I kind of view it as like critical disability studies, but for autism, which you'll then ask, what is critical disability studies?
Exactly.
But basically, I think it focuses around like not taking autism for granted as like a thing, especially a biomedical thing, and kind of paying more attention to kind of like how this thing has come to be and what might be happening in our society, or what this says about society, or kind of what we do with this idea of autism.
And so, me personally, I think we need the medical model of disability, but we also need the social model of disability. And so, in German, the word disabled would be the word behindert. And just like in English, to be disabled is a passive construction. So the person with the disability, they don't have to act or do anything to be disabled. It's other people acting that leads to them being disabled. And I always thought that's a proper way of expressing it. It's not necessarily something inherently in the person itself, but it has a lot to do with how the person is treated. And so, for instance, someone who sits in a wheelchair, they will most probably not be able to get up a flight of stairs by themselves. And so that is a real thing where they are actually disabled, where it becomes obvious, like, no, there's physics involved and stuff. So that should be obvious to any onlooker. But then when we have a person in a wheelchair that works in an office job, they might still be treated as if they were disabled. But if they work an office job, are they really disabled? If the building has an elevator, because they can do everything that other people can do. And then if they can do all the things that other people do, but they're still being treated as if they're disabled, then it's something that's inside of people's heads. It doesn't have anything to do with the person in the wheelchair. And so, for instance, my impression is that when people see someone who has lost a limb, or maybe was born without one, it seems to me that the average regular person has kind of a perception of that is only like 95% of a human being, or only 90%, that there's something missing. Because otherwise I can't understand why handicapped people or disabled people are oftentimes being treated with a certain demeanor, you know? Unless they have really proven themselves. So I would assume that For instance, a Peter Dinklage or someone of his status, it wouldn't come as easy for a bully to treat him as disabled because of the position he has in society in terms of wealth, power, and so on. Okay, now I kind of lost my thread.
It sounds like you're talking about the social model of disability, medical model of disability.
Yeah.
People think about disability.
Thank you for giving me the words. Yes. And so, yeah. Ever since I have started my looking at myself as disabled, so I got my autism diagnosis late in life, and in the beginning I was more in the psychology space, and I eventually moved over to the disability space, which partially has to do with my personal experience with psychology and psychotherapy, not psychology, with psychotherapy, which was really horrible. And so, for instance, I could no longer, like, if I had the need for a psychotherapy, I would have to find some alternative. I can no longer engage in psychotherapy because of the experience I've made in the past. I would also argue that in psychotherapy and psychology, the view of people is very much focuses on negative aspects of the person, things they cannot do, where in the disability space, it feels more like they look at you and they're like, okay, here's your strengths, let's build them up. Here's your weaknesses, let's see if we can moderate them. So it feels way more wholesome and positive to me. And no, I've talked so much.
No.
So yeah, I'll just leave the stage to you. You say something about the medical and the social model.
Yeah. Well, I think also what you're saying about like kind of also disability focused communities is kind of what you alluded to of like the role of other people outside of yourself who maybe acting in ways that are helpful and help you kind of like be your best self. And then there's also ways that people are discriminatory or maybe like even not intentionally, but like maintaining different barriers in like the status quo of society that keeps people from doing what they want to do. I feel like slowly, because I was introduced to these ideas in a disability studies class that I happened to take in undergrad, and I'd not encountered those like ideas of models of disability before. And then that was like 10 years ago or something, maybe more. I don't, but like now I feel like more recently I've felt some of these ideas creep into at least like autism research that's like relatively more in the like social sciences kind of mainstream outside of critical studies, which has been interesting. Of people, I think people find this way of thinking about disability a good way to like put it into words. I think sometimes now the issue is sometimes I think people are like, these are the two models of disability, and then that's all there is.
And let's have them fight to the death.
So they're like, medical model, that's the bad one, social model, it's the good one. And I'm like, there's more to it than that. But it's nice to see that some of these ideas are starting to make it into a little bit more mainstream psychological research in autism.
Yeah. And one thought experiment I like to have people do in regards to this is just imagine a world where 95% of the people were in wheelchairs, and only 5% of the people could walk. So there'd probably be a kind of elevator that just grips onto your wheelchair, because why would you need to build the whole elevator box if you can just grip onto the wheelchair? That would mean that the 5% of people who don't go around in a wheelchair and don't have one ready on them, they couldn't use those elevators. So that is always some a thing. Like, I try to make it more imaginable for people who don't have anything to do with the field of disability. Okay. So critical autism studies, as far as I understand, has somewhat of a critical outlook on the biomedical model. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say so. I think at least it doesn't say that. I don't think critical autism studies people are a monolith, but I think they would generally agree that like autism is not just this biomedical thing as defined in whatever reference you're using.
So would you argue? Would you say that the criticism of the biomedical model is that the criticism is that when it's used as a monolith, that just the biomedical model is not okay, but completely throwing it out of the window would not make sense either? Is that?
Yeah, like I think for me, I think there are like biological aspects of autism. I don't think they're fully understood. But I also think that a lot of the difficulties autistic people faced aren't because of these things. They're because of, like, I think a lot about like employment, about like how other people might be responding to them. But I wouldn't say, and I think the idea of like autism as a category of thing is not in its final form. If it does reach its final form, but like, I think there's biomedical bits there, and I think there's societal bits there, and the categorization right now is a little bit rough, but serves a useful enough purpose for right now, but could be improved.
Just wait till we get to the biomechanical bits. Okay, so the reason why I've asked you all these questions is I'm wondering if you were to do an empirical study on autism, where for the study it would be you needed a group of autistic people and you needed a control group of non-autistic people. How would you determine who is autistic and who is not?
I think it depends on what my goal of the study is. Largely, what I've done is, especially when I'm like on survey-based research, is just ask them if they're autistic. People usually have the option of like being like, yes, I got a diagnosis, or I don't have a diagnosis, but I suspect I'm autistic. But I also know this approach won't necessarily work in all contexts. I think it depends on like if you want to risk, if it's worse to include people who like might not actually be autistic, however you define it, or if it's worse to leave people out who were autistic but didn't have access to a diagnosis. But I mean, I think my conceptualization of autism is like, I think the simplest answer is like, do they fit the DSM criteria? Yeah, but I think I've, in all practical aspects of like research I've been a part of, people have already been through either a diagnostic process or maybe considering it.
Okay.
So I feel like this is a little bit of a cop-out answer of like who counts. But that's, yeah, I think it just depends on.
Why do you think it's a cop-out answer? I mean, you laid out there might be a study where it's important to make it tight and to make sure that only, well, let's say a bit where you would test a bit more if they are actually autistic, to have them in there. And there's other studies where it would not be as important. So no, I don't think it's a cop-out answer. I think that's a precise answer.
All right. I'll take that.
And let's have a look at your research, an expert roundtable discussion on intersectionality and autism and adulthood. So one of the points is more diverse representation in studies in leadership. How pressing do you think that is?
I think it's pretty pressing because I feel like, I think on the studies side, I think there's, especially as I'm starting to read, even across the age range of like, there's a lot on children, there's some stuff on adults, and then there's like not very much on older adults, which is like kind of freaky as somebody who hopes to eventually become an older adult. So, and I think, but I think also just in terms of like demographic diversity and in terms of the type of research that's been done, I think that we have kind of a general idea of like some things that are going on in autism, but I feel like there's so many specific situations that people are in, and some things that might differ for different subgroups of people, or just people who are being left out of the research process, I feel like is important. And I think on the leadership side, like that, kind of a similar thing. I think if there's, on the bit of the kind of bottom up in studies, but then also the top down a bit on leadership of kind of, I think it shows what types of research and perspectives fields find valuable.
And this might be because I'm autistic, but my original stance on science, or my idea of it, was that if you're a scientist, it doesn't matter whether you're autistic or not if you're studying autism, because you're a scientist. You do it by the rules of science, so the result should be the same, right? But then there was, for instance, the recent, that is not my position anymore. There was the recent interview with Uta Frith, which left me a bit shocked, to be honest, because some of the things she said were so dismissive of lived experience of autistic people that I was thinking, like, how can you be a leading figure in autism research for like 60 years or however she's in that field and be so dismissive of the people that you're studying? That was amazing. That felt amazing to me. The way she was talking about headphones. So we're talking about a group of people where we know they have less filters for the input that comes from the outside. And then they use a device as a filter so that they get less input, because we also know that when they get too much input, they wear out. But you're going to be like, no, I don't know if that's going to help. I can't really say. I have to do my science first. Like, that felt so... And if that is that is the kind of attitude that is prevalent amongst autism researchers, then we're going to need some autistic people in there.
Yeah, it was nice that I went to my first INSAR, the International Society for Autism Research Conference.
Wait, say that again,
recently.
please.
INSAR, International Society for Autism Research, last week. And it was, and I think they've likely come a long way from before I got involved, but like, it was nice that there was kind of a sense of there's not assuming that autistic people weren't there in the room also doing research, or also like kind of reading about or hearing about what they were talking about. So I think things are slowly coming along, but then also really disappointing interviews, and you're like, okay, well, maybe not.
In the when I read about the paper, the roundtable discussion, one term that popped up to me was identity affirming approaches, and I think that is a point of contention for in the current discussion about neurodiversity. So please explain to me, what does identity affirming approach mean to you, and what does it mean in context of your work?
I think for me, basically it means like, one, not viewing autism as a terrible thing. And then also two, I think focusing on like what is actually bothering the person, rather than like focusing on particular like thoughts or expectations about how people should be or should act, when it's like, if that's not bothering them, then like whatever.
Okay, I can get fully on board on that, because that would be a perfect lever to get ABA out of the room. Not a big fan of ABA therapy.
Yeah, I think, a lot of that has been, focused a lot on what, like, beliefs about how people should be acting, when it's like,
make the autistic person look normal, so we don't have to bother with all the weirdness anymore.
Yeah, so I'd say that is not identity affirming.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The reason that the term makes me somewhat weary is from what I've seen in trans affirming approach, where they took it as far as, we're going to have minors decide we're going to let them decide over operations that will make them infertile for the rest of their life, where they're going to lose body parts and so on. So I thought that took it way too far. But the whole thing, like here in let's say in the closer vicinity, here it's a lot. In Germany, for instance, it's a problem. You get a diagnosis from one doctor, you get the autism diagnosis, then you go to a different doctor, and maybe the reason you're going to that doctor doesn't even have anything to do with the autism, but you mention that you have autism because that seems to play a part in patient-doctor relationships. I don't know if that has ever been a point of research for you, but maybe you've come across the research of other people. It seems to be that autistic people tend to rub doctors the wrong way, or that they get confused when they don't get enough information from the doctor. And so it seems like a good idea to mention that you're autistic, but then the doctor might be like, no, you're not autistic. So I suppose that would be really annoying.
Yeah, I know there's been some research from I know their acronym is ASPIRE, but like about like kind of healthcare toolkits of like trying to figure out, that doctor-patient communication, especially with respect to autism. I don't know much about that in detail. But I think, sometimes people might be like, different medical providers might be like sort of like skeptical of other people's diagnoses, or the opposite of like kind of diagnostic overshadowing, or it's like all your problems are just the autism and anything else you say is probably just the autism. So kind of the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that is annoying as well. I went to a doctor once and with back problems, and he was like, "No, you don't have back problems. You just feel these things more intensely because you're autistic." That wasn't helpful
like
at all.
that you feel your back, that the same conclusion is you're feeling back problems.
Yeah. Okay, so can you give me a short synopsis of the outcome of that roundtable discussion?
So I was actually not, sorry, now my cat is biting me, not necessarily a critical part of this roundtable discussion. I feel like it was drawing more on kind of both work that I've done and work that other people have done in the field related to intersectionality. So I am not sure what the outcome was. I think the outcome was kind of adding to the pile of like evidence of like, we need to think about these things more. But yeah, I'd be interested because that was a few years ago. So it'd be cool if they did an update or like a round 2.
But one of the things was that autistic people should be involved more in the definition of, in the research about, in the definition of autism. It is what I picked up from the paper.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think it's been growing in, I think, prevalence in terms of how much like autistic people have been more involved as kind of the core research team, or also as like kind of people who aren't researchers who are involved in the research. So I think that's been cool to see.
Is that also your takeaway from the Autism Europe conference?
Yeah, I think Autism Europe was nice in terms of, I think it did a nice job of having both like the kind of like traditional researcher perspective and the kind of like applications in the community, and also kind of like one of the presentations that our team did included that they set the study up before I got involved, but they set it up very well, of like having people who weren't researchers but were autistic kind of trained up a little bit in some of the research methods and kind of giving their perspectives and being really involved, which I like, because I think it is important to have autistic researchers, but I also think like I think I've like, for me specifically, like I have a very unique, I guess, like educational path that like most autistic people aren't necessarily going into research, but their like views are still very important. And I feel like I can't speak for all autistic people, and neither necessarily can they, but it's better than just me, if that makes sense.
I really like the Autism Europe conference. As I am, the Autism Charity of Ireland will from now on be my bookmark, not bookmark, benchmark in regards to autism organizations. They're headed by someone who has autism. I think more than 50% of their staff are actually autistic. So them being the local partner of Autism Europe to do the conference, that was great. But then the conference itself, I mean, I'm a complete nobody. I didn't finish school. I finished school, but I didn't finish any of my studies. All I got is my lived experience and the practical experience from working with autistic people. And I got to do a poster presentation there, just for being autistic. And it's one of the most prominent autism conferences in the world, as far as I can tell. So that is a pretty good
Yeah.
standard, in my opinion. Then a lot of the major speakers were more autistic people, and I don't have any numbers, but it felt to me like when going through the halls, it felt like somewhere a third or maybe half of the people had some neurodiverse background as well.
Mhm.
So that felt really good.
Yeah, it was nice.
Okay, let's have a look at Endorsement of the Neurodiversity Framework and Self-Esteem among Autistic and Non-Autistic Adults. So this is a survey study that you did. And it came to the conclusion that people who endorse the neurodiversity framework tend to have a better self-image, higher self-esteem, somewhat more shielded against stigma and low self-worth. And so could you explain to me what the neurodiversity framework is?
Yeah.
In the context of this?
In the context of this paper, it was using a survey scale that I developed that's looking at the neurodiversity framework. It ended up being kind of like, based on the statistics, that kind of ended up grouping these different statements into categories. The main categories had to do with like stigmatizing views towards autism. So basically the opposite of that. So neurodiversity movement being non-stigmatizing views towards autism. Another main category had to do with viewing autism as either neutral or positive difference rather than a deficit. And then the third category was viewing autism as a permanent condition that can't be changed or cured. I think the neurodiversity movement is framework and also is like more than just autism, and also is more than these three categories of things. But I think in terms of this study, I feel like it was at least a nice start of kind of thinking about how people are thinking about autism and how that might be related to self-esteem, especially in autistic people. But yes, for this study, the thing that was related to self-esteem for autistic people, but not for non-autistic people, is viewing autism as a difference rather than a deficit, which makes sense. So yeah, I feel like it's kind of one of those things that feels a bit intuitive, but it was cool to see with the data.
Yeah, that makes sense to me as well. And it didn't have a familiar experience with all of the diagnoses that I got before, but maybe that was also because they didn't really feel accurate. But I never got no, I did. I think doctors are weird sometimes, but I think I got the borderline diagnosis, if I could remember correctly. It was not just suggested. And if you look at that diagnosis, that feels like more like a spell that you cast on an enemy. Because if you read through that, if you believe that that is what you are, like, how are you going to live with that self-image?
Yeah, I think especially borderline is an interesting one because it's very stigmatized. I think especially in like therapy communities, but then also if you read through the things, you're like, oh, am I that?
It is definitely stigmatized in the sense that it's harder for them to find therapeutic personnel that will work with them. But it even goes in the other direction where therapeutic personnel will not use the term. They will make up some diagnosis that doesn't exist, or they will give another diagnosis to avoid the negative associations that come with the diagnosis. So yeah, it makes sense that if you frame things positively and give people hope through the way you define them, that it might work for them better.
Yeah. And even
if you do the
even not
opposite.
it doesn't even have to be positive. It just has to be like not bad.
Yeah. It'll have to give room for you to do something about it. Like if it tells you you're going to end up in a bad place no matter what you do, that's not going to be helpful. And then another work of yours is examining the associations between endorsement of disability models and system justification within disabled and non-disabled individuals. Could you give us a short summary of what that paper was about?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the social medical models of disability, of kind of viewing the social model was sort of viewing the disability experience as related to your experience in society, and the medical model being a bit more within one's own individual body. So systems justification basically has to do with kind of how much people are okay with the status quo, which is kind of an interesting like political psychology world. So, and I feel like I keep being drawn to bits and pieces from different fields and bringing them together. So there's a kind of there's the disability world, there's the political psychology world, and these feel like kind of intuitively related because a lot of the disability world's related to like disability political movements. So anyways, it's looking at if we think about the models of disability, generally the medical model is a bit more of like what the traditional status quo is of how people traditionally have thought about disability in recent years. So I was wanting to look at, is this related to justifying existing systems in general? And also, does this depend on lived experience of disability? And basically found that generally, yeah, if you've system justifying beliefs, you're more likely to agree with the medical model and disagree with the social model. And then, and I'm like, I always want to double check because I don't want to say it wrong. But for people without disabilities, greater systems I feel like I'm looking at this graph and I'm like trying to explain this graph because I feel like the graph explains it better. But basically, I'll explain the graph. We've got two lines on the graph.
Yeah.
And there's also 2 points on the graph, and the graph's looking at like people who don't agree with the social model very much versus people who agree with the social model a lot. So low social model and high social model. And then on the y-axis is systems justification. So basically, the higher it is, the more they kind of generally tend to agree with the status quo systems in society. And then there's two lines on the graph, one for people without disabilities and one for people with disabilities. And basically for having a disability, the line is like generally pretty flat of your level of how much you agree with the social model isn't really related to how you feel about justifying current systems. But if you do not have a disability, having not endorsing the social model very much is related to more system justification. So I feel like this is
Yeah, it breaks it down.
I went into the weeds a bit, but yeah.
No, that makes totally sense, because, I mean, if you're not disabled, then you don't know about the social implications, unless maybe your partner is disabled, or you're friends with someone who has a disability who will give you some insights on it. But yeah, I thought I'd expect for a normie, no disability, they'd probably look at disability as something out of a textbook, but not necessarily understand the lived experience that goes along with it. And that is something like that resonates with my experience with people. So when you meet people who, for instance, have a disabled sibling, their attitude towards disability is so dramatically different.
Yeah. And I was also, I think you had asked a question over email about the other paper about neurodiversity and self-esteem, and wondering like how that relates to like kind of connection to the autistic community. And I was looking at the data, and it was because I did collect information about like, do you know other autistic people? And generally, yeah, people who didn't know any autistic people at all had more stigmatizing views of autism. So kind of like this very abstract concept of autism that kind of mapped onto some of the stereotypes that may or may not be acceptable in our society. But also, like, only one autistic person in that study didn't know any autistic people. So this is generally among non-autistic people. But yeah, I think having this more personal experience with disability or autism, I think, gives people more nuanced views.
It reminds me of a documentary that I looked into recently. It was about an autistic woman living in Germany, and her demeanor felt to me like she was very much focused on fitting in. And it's just, this might just be my projection, but it felt to me as if she didn't like it when she couldn't do things in a proper way, or she had an assistant, and it just seemed to me that there was some internalized ableism.
Yeah.
I don't that'd be the shortest way to point it out, like that she kind of looked down on herself for not being able to do all the things, and you know, like looking down at herself for having deficits in certain areas. And yeah, so I try to not do that. Like sometimes it comes easy to me, sometimes I have to actively work for that, but I try to really not, like, I know that I have some deficits if you compare me to a neurotypical person, if they exist. Yeah, that is an interesting sentence. What someone said to me recently. What the thing that someone said to me was, the set of neurotypical people is an empty set. That is something that someone said to me recently. And before the person said that to me, I was quite comfortable using the term neurotypical. I'm not so comfortable anymore now.
Yeah.
I still use the term in my seminars when I explain to people about autism and not autism. I mean, you gotta explain it somehow. But then, yeah, the term, the sentence, the statement that the neurotypical set is an empty set might be a true statement. I still have to think about that stuff. But anyways, so we were at the system justification, and disability models, and I have one more of your papers on my list, and that's the public perceptions of the neurodiversity movement. And can you give us a short synopsis of what that paper was about?
Basically, it was about, it's sort of the opposite side of my paper where I made that scale about, like, if you agree with these items, you agree with the neurodiversity movement. It's the opposite of asking people what they thought the goals of the neurodiversity movement are and how they felt about it. Because it's one of those words that, especially nowadays, gets used a lot. And it seems to me people mean slightly different things by it. So this was looking at how people answer that question.
And what did you find out?
Generally, people kind of like grouped around the same ideas. They weren't necessarily all saying all the ideas in their definitions, but in general, people had kind of like a positive view of the neurodiversity framework, like if they had heard of it, because this only had people who had heard of it. So I think in general, people viewed it as something that's advocating for rights of neurodivergent people. Often they kind of mention autism or ADHD, and kind of viewing neurodiversity as a form of diversity that should be accepted. That was kind of the broad view. People had different kind of specific iterations. And then there's also kind of people who were a bit more skeptical about the movement or disagreed with it, who generally their critiques had to do with, I think, worrying that it didn't really take into account people who are really impaired by their disabilities or their carers, or kind of worrying that it's like too extreme.
Yeah, I think that brings us right to the focal point of discussion at the moment. Yeah. My impression is that, like, there's several ideas that come to mind when I think about the neurodiversity movement. So the idea of a political movement that will kind of, in a sense, like the gay rights movement. Before the gay rights movement, there wasn't a lot of gay rights. There were rights for heterosexual people. And there might even be laws that would criminalize homosexual people, depending on what country you were in. So in Germany, for instance, in the 1950s, you could officially still go to prison for being a homosexual. It was rare that it happened. But then we look at the very sad example of Alan Turing, who is a war hero that helped defeat the Nazis and also the inventor of the modern computer. And he was, after the war, chemically castrated, which was a punishment because he had been caught, I don't know, not in the act of intercourse as far as I know, but having associations with a person of the wrong gender. And that eventually drove him to suicide. So, and if the neurodiversity movement were capable of extending the civil liberties and civil rights of people in the same sense that the gay rights movement did for gay people, that the lesbian rights movement did for lesbians, black rights movement did for black people, and so on, that'd be cool. I'd be up for that. And the fields that I think would be important would have a lot to do with education and the work environment. I think that would be things where we might need additional jurisdiction and so But then there is a fear, because I think we got to put it into a bit of a context. I mean, there's the wokies, and from the way I have talked about them, one might have picked up on the fact that me personally, I'm not too big of a fan of the whole wokeness thing, and it feels to me like they went from group to group. So they start from the idea of wokeism starts out in the Black rights movement, but I would argue that whatever started out in the 40s or 60s or wherever you want to put it in the Black rights movement, I'd say we have a new form of wokeness that started out somewhere in 2010, or started to become big and meaningful somewhere in 2010. And they went into all the civil liberties movements and groups, and some of them got prominent there. And I think the trans movement actually caught it the worst, in the sense that you have very public figures that hold very extreme, very fringe positions that don't necessarily have a lot to do with the lived reality of non-famous trans people. And I think we're seeing something similar in the way that it's happening with the neurodiversity movement, where you have some representatives who are very privileged, in the sense that they can have an autonomous life, that they maybe have a prosperous career. And they talk about autism in ways where, for instance, a family that has 2 children with early childhood autism, in the way we would frame it before we talked about a spectrum, where the whole family is in a crisis because of the needs of their children, that they don't really see themselves represented in the way that the more privileged part of the autism spectrum speaks about autism. Do you think that's a proper way to sum it up?
Yeah, I feel like there's a few different things going on. Like, I think sometimes people can take their individual experience of autism and then think that applies to everybody's experience of autism. And I think there's also historically been like a lot of tension between the kind of autistic adult community and then the like parents of autistic children, in terms of competing priorities, when I think in ideal circumstances, both those priorities are like included in what I would view as the neurodiversity framework. But I think there's the actual implementation of that is a bit trickier. And then I think there's the question of like potentially like kind of co-opting terminology that's related to neurodiversity, but just having the same kind of stigmatizing attitudes about disability and autism. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of stuff going on that happens, I think, in many social movements as they become more popular. But I think specifically to autism, it's kind of this historical tension plus the autism is like such a wide range of experiences that I think sometimes if you feel a very strong identification with autism, the concept, it can be hard to view other people's experience that are different as like also kind of connected to your own in a way. Yeah. So I guess I think from my perspective, like, I don't think the issue is necessarily about like being too woke, but it's more about like, I think just having preconceived notions and lack of openness to other perspectives at times when these could be like people who could be like allies and like kind of help further your cause, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm. You're too nice and into
I also like, I feel like I have this idealistic vision of like what the neurodiversity movement should be. Yeah.
No, wait. Don't even feel the need to justify yourself to that statement I just made. My problem with this is I was hoping for something more, that would rub me in a way that I could pick up on it, but you said it so nicely and like involving everybody, and like it's hard to criticize it in the way that you put it. or not necessarily criticize, but pick up on further things. Yeah, I feel really very alienated in a way. Like, so originally I thought the idea of the neurodiversity movement, great idea. Because I think, as I said before, civil liberties, civil rights, there needs to be some extension for neurodiversity, in my opinion. And recently on social media, I've been flooded with content that is just in different ways. Some of it I disagree with, some of it actually makes me uncomfortable. Because it's so far away from my own personal experience of autism, from my experience with self-help groups and, being part of the autism community. I don't even like to use the term because I think it doesn't make that much sense. But, being someone who themselves is finding out about autism and therefore relying on people who were there before, who can tell you something. But then also working with autistic people myself now. I just feel so alienated by a lot of the things that are written. So I'll give you an example. I don't agree with what Robert Kennedy had to say on autism. And what's the name of the medication he mentioned? I only have that German name.
The paracetamol
right now.
During pregnancy. Yeah.
Yeah. Lysonol. What's the name again? In the US?
Is this what he's talking about? The painkiller during pregnancy? Yeah. The paracetamol is the.
Yeah. Genau. Paracetamol. That would be the German way of saying it, but there was another name he used. But
it may have been the brand name.
Yeah. Anyways, so I don't agree what he said and the way he framed it. And I don't like that he listens to that person that he listens to. But one of the things he said, that there's autistic children who will never pay taxes. And then everybody made fun of that. But I have worked with children like that. They will never pay taxes. They will never be able to hold a job in the first work market. Never. They won't be able to do it. They will probably have to live the rest of their lives in a home where other adults make sure that they have everything that they need, because they will not be able to provide themselves with that. And it bothers me so much when people take the opposite stance to a Robert Kennedy just out of spite, just showing like, I'm really against that. Yes, we got it. You're against that, which is justified, but maybe not to the extremity that you're doing it. Like things like that just make me weary. of where it's going. And then I have always been in left wing and in alternative spaces, and I've seen how toxic things can get around the gender discussion, for instance, where I've worked in an anarchist center, and there were discussions about women's quotas, feminism, stuff like that, and it led to half of, or even more than half of the active people just going away. There was a fight between two groups, there was a split, and half of the active people just vanished. And it would have almost taken out that center. And so I see all the destruction in structures and groups that can be caused by these divisive ideas. And that's something I worry about in regards to the neurodiversity movement and to the part that the wokies play in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, and I was thinking about the like RFK like thing. I think there was the initial reaction of like plenty of autistic people do work and pay taxes and do all that, and like the kind of just but then there was,
I really like the meme.
But then there's like people being like, well, even if you can't do that, you're still a valuable human being, like, which should be the message. And they also deserve rights. But then, I think there's, the kind of like, then there's a part of the internet can be a very toxic place. And then like, I feel like leftist infighting is like not necessarily productive. Of then I think there's kind of arguments about how to perfectly do something when then you just have somebody like RFK in power who's like saying nonsense, like when we could be working together, even if there's like a bit of is not necessarily agreeing on everything or not necessarily being the most smooth. But I feel like that's easier said than done because it's so high stakes of like feeling like people's rights are on the line after historically being treated very badly. So it's hard to not fall into that. And I feel like being connected with people outside of the internet has helped me be, I think, like a bit less rigid about, like, sometimes I see people online being like, immediately tear somebody down if they use person first language, when it's like, I mean, I do prefer identity first language, but like,
I always get confused with that.
Person with autism is
identity first is person with autism, and
other way around.
No, the other way around.
Autistic person is identity first.
Okay, autistic person, and if you say autist instead, that would be
autist is more niche. That I feel like people have.
What's the alternative to saying autistic person
with autism?
Saying person with autism. Oh yeah, okay. No.
But like, I think there again. I think like those vocabulary choices are important and do convey like people's values to a certain extent, but also I think you shouldn't dismiss what a person has to say, even if they're not using the type of vocabulary that you find that you prefer. That
is a thing that I very negatively correlate with wokeness, to put it in scientific terms.
I don't have. I'm not quite sure how you define wokeness, but of like what it is.
It's true. I do owe you a definition. So that which you just mentioned, these mob tactics. Oh, he used the wrong language. Let's bring him down. That is a sort of tactic that I associate with that. And when I started going to self-help groups started being part of autism, that just wasn't there. The discussion about person or identity first, that just didn't happen. That is something we didn't do in the autistic space, at least in the spaces that I visited. And that was more something that we looked on with a bit of bewilderment in terms of other disabilities, because there's also, are you a disabled person or are you a person with a disability? That whole thing. That whole thing existed in the German language space as well. But in autistic spaces, it was like, yeah, some say it like that, some say it like that, and we accept them all. It's only now that it starts becoming such a point of contention. And sometimes I wonder how much of that is actually real and how much of that is a performance that people put on or feel like they need to put on because they're doing it on the internet.
Yeah.
It's something I've noticed, that when I used the internet in the 90s, it was pretty common in discussion forums that you would have a meaningful exchange. Be it on technical aspects of a hobby, or be it in a philosophical discussion. And I feel like that has very much vanished. I feel like 80 to 90% of the interactions I have online, they don't feel genuine anymore. Someone asks a question, but they don't care about your answer. They just care that you put an answer, so the counter of answers that they got goes up by one. They don't care at all about what you answer. Or you try to have a discussion, you try to have an exchange, and people just want to be right. They just want to win.
Yeah.
They don't want to pick up a new idea. They don't want to explain their idea to you. They just want to make themselves look good, make you look bad in the process. Things like that. And so I'm thinking how much of that is actually real and how much is due to the internet being the internet.
Yeah. And I think, and also now I'm all like paranoid because I'm like, oh, now it's like, are these even real people talking, or is this all just AIs talking to each other? But yeah,
that as well.
But yeah, it's easy. Yeah, something about the internet is, something about it like draws this inclination in people sometimes, which is interesting because the neurodiversity movement like kind of originated in internet spaces.
But I think there's a part of the internet that births demons. And I think AI, I mean, we'd have to get a bit more into demonology and definition of demons. But just a very rough one. A demon is something that feels like a person but might not be. And by that definition, I hope the listener understands that I'm kind of talking about artificial intelligence here, bots and things that give off the appearance of being human beings that might pass a superficial Turing test. They might not be persons at all. Anyways, Rachel, it's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, this has been fun.
And I hope I properly, I gave you a proper forum to present your work. And maybe we can do something similar like this in the future. And thank you for being my guest today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, for kind of putting this all together. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, this has been fun.
And thank you for the work that you do, and please keep on doing it. I have one final question for you. What is autism to you in your own words?
I was like, I remembered you asked this to people, and I was like, oh, that's a hard question, and I don't know how to answer it. And now I'm like, oh God, I should have thought about this. I think
I always enjoy when people start squirming after I have asked.
I feel like it's hard for me to fully define and understand exactly what autism is, but I think there's commonalities across autistic people in our experiences of the world and of ourselves, that I think the issue with defining autism is sort of the uniqueness of each autistic person and their experiences. And then when you're trying to put it all together, it's like,
I know what you mean. When I meet other autistic people, there's something I pick up on. I couldn't tell you what it is.
So, it's still a little bit of a mystery to me, even though it is a thing that I think about a lot.
Yeah. That statement very much resonates with me. Okay.
All right. Yeah, thank you.
Rachel.